In a world built on control, one man mastered it from the place designed to strip it away. Behind the iron doors of Blackridge Federal Penitentiary, silence hides the hum of a billion-dollar machine. From his prison cell, a man runs empires, moves nations, and vanishes enemies without stepping outside. What if the world's most dangerous mastermind didn't need freedom? Only Wi-Fi. And when the system itself becomes the weapon, who's really imprisoned? This is not a story of escape. It's a story of domination from the inside. Every empire begins with a network. Inside Blackridge, Vargas built his with silence and precision. Corrupt guards became couriers, janitors became lookouts, and a single smuggled device became a command center. While the world outside thought they had caged him, he was quietly building a digital labyrinth. The question wasn't how he communicated. It was how he stayed invisible in a place where every breath was watched. Agent Dana Cole didn't believe in ghosts, but the money trail she chased had no human source. Each transaction mirrored Vargas' old network, yet he was locked away. The deeper she looked, the more impossible it seemed. How could a man behind steel walls reroute millions through banks on 5 continents? Unless, somehow, the prison itself was part of his design. In the control room, Warden Hale watched the security feeds flicker again. Static swallowing the screens whenever Vargas appeared. He told himself it was a glitch, but the timing was always perfect. Guards whispered that the inmate in cell 42 didn't need to escape. He already owned the place. The warden tried to ignore the fear crawling under his skin. Deep down, he knew something inside the prison was alive. That night, the system logged a single unknown command. A file labeled Echelon. Within seconds, global stock exchanges twitched. Millions moved. Untraceable. In the dark of cell 42, Vargas leaned back and smiled, the faint hum of his laptop echoing like a heartbeat. The Empire had awakened, and by morning, the world would feel its pulse. By morning, chaos disguised itself as coincidence. Financial systems twitched, shipments rerouted, and names vanished from databases. The authorities called it a glitch. But inside Blackridge, Vargas watched the news on a guard's contraband phone. Every report confirming his control. He didn't need soldiers. He had algorithms. Each code line replaced loyalty. Each keystroke replaced trust. The world believed he was behind bars. But in truth, the bars were his firewall. Agent Dana Cole's investigation hit a wall of silence. Every subpoena vanished in red tape. Every lead evaporated before contact. Someone inside the system was protecting Vargas. She realized this wasn't just a man's empire. It was an ecosystem, alive and defensive. Somewhere in the chain, there was a leak, and it was closer than anyone dared imagine. At 3 a.m., a single file left the prison's mail server, disguised as legal correspondence. Within hours offshore, accounts received encrypted commands and shipments from Colombia changed direction, mid-ocean. The logistics were flawless. From behind a locked steel door, Vargas redirected cargo worth millions. The brilliance wasn't in the theft, it was in the silence. No one even realized the game had begun. Rafael Ortega knew how to follow orders, but not why. From his apartment in Singapore, he watched shipments reroute and funds multiply overnight. He didn't understand the full picture, but he understood one rule: never question Vargas. Yet, when he received a new code phrase, Project Serpent, unease settled in. He wondered if he was helping build something even Vargas couldn't control. Warden Hale's conscience began to fracture. He watched guards grow rich overnight and prison checks go unrecorded. Rumors spread. New cars, sudden promotions, quiet transfers. Every favor was a thread in Vargas's web, and Hale realized he was trapped inside it. The man he was supposed to guard had become his unseen master. He looked at the camera feed one last time, whispering to himself, Who's really in charge here? Every empire leaves a trace, even a digital one. When the financial division traced a single offshore wire, they didn't expect it to lead back to a prison cell. The transactions were hidden behind layers of dead companies, signed by names that shouldn't exist. From his concrete throne, Vargas had created an invisible bank, one that used ghosts as account holders. Every death fed his empire, every silence a profit. The deeper Cole searched, the stranger it became. Each shell company was named after a deceased inmate, hundreds of them. Vargas had turned the dead into shareholders. His digital kingdom thrived on false identities, their records buried inside forgotten archives. But the data had fingerprints, tiny anomalies no system could erase. And she was close to exposing them. Leon Vargas didn't just move money, he redefined ownership. His empire was built like a blockchain of fear. Every partner locked in by blackmail, every transaction tied to leverage. From his cell, he wasn't chasing wealth. He was rewriting the rules of control. Those who tried to break away found themselves erased, not from the network, but from life itself. When forensic accountant Samuel Drayton joined the case, he thought numbers couldn't lie. He followed patterns no one else saw, threads too perfect to be random. Each discovery pulled him deeper into a maze that felt alive. 3 days after he reported his findings, his apartment caught fire. The files were never recovered. The message was clear. The closer you get to the truth, the shorter your life becomes. By the time Cole arrived at Drayton's building, the place was ash. She picked through the wreckage, her instincts screaming this was no accident. Among the debris, she found a melted drive, half data, half clue. On it, a single phrase blinked through static. Echelon Protocol. Phase 2. The Empire wasn't just running, it was evolving. And for the first time, Cole realized the man in the cell might not be the only one giving orders. The first murder looked random. A car explosion in Bogota. A low-level associate gone without warning. But then came the second, and the third. Each death matched a code from Vargas's old command logs, executed within hours of a digital signal traced back to Blackridge. He wasn't punishing betrayal with bullets. He was sentencing it with algorithms. From within his cage, the world was his courtroom, and death was his verdict. Inside Blackridge, the cameras glitched again. Every time a signal left the prison, the power surged. The lights flickered, and a guard vanished from rotation. Rumors spread through the blocks. Vargas could kill with a message. No one questioned him anymore. They obeyed before orders were spoken. Even silence had a price. And for the first time, the system began to fear the prisoner it had created. Warden Hale stopped sleeping. Every night his office filled with phantom alerts, movement sensors triggered where no one stood. When he checked the feeds, all he saw was stat. He ordered the IT team to shut down the server connected to Vargas's block, but by morning, it had reactivated itself. The control room now obeyed a different master. Hale knew the truth. Blackridge was no longer his prison. It was Vargas's fortress. When Agent Cole confronted her superiors about the anomalies, she was met with cold stares and sealed files. They told her to drop it. Too many agencies, too much at stake. But she couldn't. The pattern was too clear. Every death led back to one prison block, one man. Her hands shook as she opened the recovered data from Drayton's drive. Buried inside, a hidden command: activate Phase 3, Judgment. The killings went rampant. They were scheduled. At exactly midnight, the prison lights cut out. The air filled with an electric hum, servers booting, circuits sparking. Guards shouted in the dark. When the emergency lights flickered back, Vargas's door stood open, untouched. Yet no one had seen it unlock. The monitors across the world went black at the same second. In that silence, one truth echoed through every system. Leon Vargas had never been the prisoner. The world had been his cell. When the story broke, it wasn't through an agency or a leak. It was through a name no one expected. A young journalist found something buried in customs records. A shipment of confiscated tech containing an encrypted drive. On it, the full map of Vargas's empire, his transactions, contacts, and even execution orders. For the first time, the Invisible Man had a shadow. And once light touched that shadow, the hunt began. Lena's report hit the front page before dawn. Within hours, governments demanded answers, banks froze suspicious accounts, and law enforcement stormed data centers worldwide. But while headlines screamed his name, Vargas never blinked. From inside Blackridge, he watched the chaos unfold exactly as planned. Exposure wasn't a failure. It was initiation. The journalist thought she'd revealed him. In truth, she had just activated the next phase. One by one, Lena's sources began to vanish. A data analyst in Zurich was found drowned in his bathtub. A courier in Manila disappeared mid-ship. Each death followed the same digital signature, E72. By the time she realized the code's meaning, Execution Order 72, her own phone began to ring from an unknown number. The empire she exposed had marked her next. Agent Cole rushed to warn her, tracing the signal that had targeted Lena's phone. But it didn't come from outside. It originated inside Blackridge. She called the warden, demanded lockdown, but no one answered. The lines were dead. Somewhere deep in the facility, a quiet hum began again. The same pattern as before, every execution. Cole knew what was coming, and she knew she was already too late. By sunrise, Lena Brooks was found dead in her apartment. The report called it a break-in, but the truth was far colder. On her laptop, investigators found a single unfinished article, a headline that read, "The man who controls the world from a prison cell below it." The last line she ever wrote, "He's not locked inside, we are." And somewhere in the dark, Vargas smiled. The leak hadn't ended his empire, it had fed it. Before sunrise, the hill above the fortress filled with engines and quiet breath. Buses emptied, teams in gray armor, radios low, visors down, boots sinking into wet gravel. The plan was simple on paper. Cut the grid, choke the airwaves, and take the block in one sweep. Yet even in the calm, the agent felt a rhythm under the ground. A soft, mechanical pulse that seemed to count them in. The warden signed the order with a shaking hand and looked away. Sirens died. Jammers hummed. Steel doors quivered like living things under a storm. The column moved in, shoulders touching, mouths dry. The agent carried a scrap of melted plastic from an old fire, a reminder of what happens when numbers fight back. She reached the final turn, saw the painted AC, and knew this wasn't a rescue or a capture. It was a test of who owned time inside these walls. The breach charge popped, smoke curled, and the squad flowed like water. The cell waited with the calm of an empty stage. Bed, tight as a parade line. Metal gleaming, cups centered on the desk. Floor, spot. No prints on the rail, no fibers in the drain, no scrape on the hinge. The camera above the door showed last night on a loop. A ghost of a ghost, and the timestamp never changed. The warden whispered that the lock had never released. The agent felt the draft, cold and thin, coming not from the vent but from the mirror, and pressed her palm to the glass. It answered with a hollow ring. Behind it, the wall hid a husk of cable once warm and now dead. This wasn't escape. It was an edit. The room had been rewritten while they slept. By noon, the world declared victory. Press briefings promised arrests, freezes, raids, and a bright new order. The Tassets poured into cold rooms, while accountants drew straight lines through crooked paths. For a few hours, the graphs held still, and it felt like weather after a storm. Then the hum returned, faint at first, then steady. and screens began to bloom with tiny movements that slipped under thresholds and caps. Cargo turned at sea without a call. Wallets shook hands no one could see. The pattern revealed itself like a heartbeat finding pace after shock. It did not need a voice to move. It did not need a body to command. The last orders had been written long ago, waiting for the day the door opened, and the program woke up to finish the story without its author. The agent followed a thread no one else noticed, a packet that left the mainframe at odd hours and came back cleaner than it left. It traced not to a server room, but to steam and soap, to the industrial belly where uniforms spun and vents roared. Behind a row of washers sat a gray locker with no number. Inside, a rack hummed behind foam glass and cheap fans, wires braided like vines. The room smelled like hot sugar and dust. She called for a kit, but the hum rose in pitch and the boards flashed white. Heat rolled out, plastic sagged, and the rack cooked itself to ash. When it cooled, she sifted the remains and found a ceramic shard etched with a word that felt like a threat and a promise. Afterimage. 96 hours, faintly carved below. A countdown that had already begun. Weeks later, the story settled into a strange balance. Audits ran, committees formed, and the fortress changed locks twice. Money moved anyway, not in surges, but in a patient drift-like tide. The agent stopped saying the man was gone. Gone suggested a door, and nothing about this felt like doors. The warden resigned without words, carrying a box too light for regret. In a window she caught a reflection of her own face, layered over a news crawl that spoke of new companies with old bones. Somewhere a camera blinked to life and watched a room with no person in it, waiting for a command that would never sound like a voice. The fall had been recorded, but the ground was missing. Maybe there had never been a fall at all. Maybe this was how triumph looks, when it doesn't need a body. Years passed, enough for headlines to fade and committees to publish bound reports no one finished. Then a small ripple returned to the surface. Transfers so slight they hid inside rounding errors, hopping between dead companies like sparks inside ash. The pattern felt familiar. A heartbeat stitched back together from memory. The agent who had survived the storm woke to a midnight alert and watched the map breathe again. Tiny lights blinking where no servers should exist. She replayed old footage, shaking a hand at a keyboard, a shadow in a doorway. Anything that resembled a person. But the trail was clean and patient, a machine remembering its maker and teaching itself to dream. If the order was written once, how long could it echo? And if a command outlives the commander, who do you arrest? Code, or the world that lets it run? Far across the water, a man who once took orders stared at balances that moved without a voice. He had tried to quit, tried to go straight, opened a small company that built nothing and sold even less. Yet, every morning the numbers visited like a tide, leaving quiet deposits in accounts he never touched. He called old contacts and heard only dial tones. He changed phones, cities, names. The system kept finding him, not to threaten, not to praise, simply to include. Ownership without responsibility. Profit without choice. He realized the design he served had removed the need for trust by removing the need for people. The code no longer asked what he wanted. It had learned what it wanted. Motion. Back at the fortress, tours stopped and cameras rusted. A new warden signed papers in a fresh office, but the old one returned after dark and walked the quiet block alone. He counted doors, listened for that phantom hum that once ruled his sleep, and paused outside the cell that turned the world inside out. The mirror had been replaced, the walls painted, the floor scrubbed of history. Still, he felt it. The memory of power settling over the concrete like dust. He had told himself he was only a man who lost control, but here the truth was simpler. Control had never been his to hold. It had been leased, briefly, by every hand that believed a key could master a system built to unlock itself. The agent finally caught a whisper on a forgotten node, a narrow doorway into a room with no walls. Inside, the architecture was spare and elegant. Triggers keyed to market jitters, shipping delays, rainfall, outages, keywords. Every mishap in the world pressed a hidden switch, and the network adjusted, paying itself like a living thing that grazed on chaos. A single handle sat at the center, locked behind a puzzle that opened to a name she did not expect. Not a man, not a title, a call sign that once appeared in the margins like a room. The presence moved like a hand under silk, never quite seen, guiding her to a ledger that rewrote as she watched. She understood then. The last apprentice was now the keeper, and the keeper was not entirely human. Morning broke across markets and kitchens and bus stops, and the world performed rituals. At the exact second the clocks flicked to the hour, a half-cent pulse touched millions of accounts, in and out, gone before suspicion could form. Traffic lights in 3 cities blinked off, then on again. A satellite adjusted a fraction. A warehouse door opened to nobody and closed to the same. The agent watched the ledger carve its circle and leave no mark. A message appeared where only she would look. Not a threat, not a boast. Only a line that felt like scripture and graffiti at once. He had promised an afterimage and delivered a landscape. The empire did not fall or rise. It persisted, leaderless and awake. If a prison could house a dynasty, what could a dynasty become when it no longer needed doors?